Good evening. Welcome to the Peacock Alley, where we're broadcasting live tonight, the Legislature Today show, hosted with myself, Gary Emineth, and Dale Wetzel. Actually, Dale, you're the host. I'm just kind of the board op guy.
You're the better dressed of us, though.
I was dressed better last night.
You have a lovely pink shirt on.
Yeah, real men wear pink, they say.
They do. So. At least it isn't a shirt with no collar like you had on last night.
That was my priestly garment. I should have wore that tonight. You have Mary hour. But anyway, tonight we're broadcasting live from Peacock Alley.
In Bismarck, North
Dakota. That is correct. And it's Wine Down Wednesday, half-price bottles of wine. So all of you out there listening, if you need a little winding down after a busy day at the Legislature, come join us down at Peacock Alley.
And Gary Emineth himself has a glass of wine in front of him.
A glass
and
of
it's the remnants of the first half-price bottle of wine that he has consumed.
No, they better not be.
Yes.
I'll be getting a ride home
That's
tonight.
why his speech is slurred.
Hey, I only had one sip. So, Dale, you had a busy day at the Legislature today. Why don't you give us a little rundown of what happened today? It's going to be an exciting show tonight, talking about guys that like to hang out at places like this that are frustrated by some of the laws recently passed by you voters out there. No, I'm kidding.
First of all, I should point out that our three guests this evening are three people who are not out at the National Guard shooting range tonight. And the reason I mention that is because one of the forms of recreation for legislators during this session is on Wednesday nights, if they choose, they can go out to the National Guard Armory rifle range and squeeze off a few rounds. Some folks bring their own guns. I remember former Representative Ole Arsvold had brought his own firearms. And some, if you don't have a gun, the National Guard will lend you one.
Nice.
And you can test your marksmanship. It's interesting how legislators talk about how relaxing that is after a long day of committee hearings. Just go and squeeze off a few rounds. It's like the old. It's kind of a perversion of the old Herman Goering quote. When I hear the word legislature, I reach for my pistol. And
good one, Dale. I like that off the top of your head there.
Sure. Anyway, as far as what went on today, and one of the things that went on today, we're going to be talking about at some length. But one of the big hearings was a $30 million grant fund for the North Dakota University system. What it would do would make available grant money to the 11 colleges in the system. UND and NDSU, the University of North Dakota and North Dakota State University, would be eligible for up to $10 million, and the remaining 9 institutions would be eligible to get $1 million each. And the catch is, if you could call it that, is that they have to raise private money on a 2-to-1 ratio. They have to raise $2 in private funds for every $1 in grant funds. And the objective here is to encourage more private philanthropy, and the foundation executives and university officials who testified today said that state support of some kind is very important when it comes to raising private money. If they're trying to raise money for a particular project, to endow a professorship or do something of that nature, and they're going out to private donors to attempt to finance these things, it helps if they can be told, yes, the state is in on this too. The state is putting its own taxpayers' money into this as well, and that way private donors feel better or are more confident about giving money themselves. And also the president of Valley City State University, Mr. Shirley, Dr. Shirley, I should say, said that it's also a way to get entree into donors that you might not otherwise have and establish long-term relationships.
Dale, one of the things you think about all the new wealth created in the oil patch, there's stories I've heard of some people that are talking tens of millions of dollars, and there's a trust. Where do you put some of that, right? How much you want to leave for your kids, and so the value of this is a great way to invest in the future of North Dakota students. And even those farmers made a lot of money in the last couple of years, from what I understand. But that the point of it is that's a great opportunity. I think good timing.
It's interesting you mentioned that because the gentlemen, the foundation people, were all asked, how is the fundraising climate out there? And these people are they're like farmers in that they never say, boy, we're doing great, because it's like bad luck. But these people basically said it's okay, which means it's
great.
going very well. Yes,
if it's okay,
raising money.
Yeah.
It's a good climate to raise money in North Dakota, and I guess that's why this makes this particular proposal important. There's the Senate Finance and Tax Committee is looking at a bill to expand the homestead tax credit, which is a program for that benefits people who are totally disabled and 65 years old or older. Right now, there are income restraints on the program. You can't make more than $26,000. You can't have more than $75,000 worth of assets. And what the proposal is to raise this income ceiling to $50,000 and also to get rid of the asset test. There's frankly, some disquiet amongst the committee members, the Senate Finance and Taxation Committee members, about some of the financials of the bill. Is $50,000 too much? Is unlimited assets something that they want to get into? Should there be a cap, even if it's frankly a lot higher than it is now? I think that's what they're going to be talking about when they work on the bill. And the third thing, one of them, is what we're going to be speaking about with our guests, and it is a bill that would require compensation for businesses that are having to spend money in order to obey the new initiated measure no smoking law. And the reason for this is that businesses, I think it's fair to say, they've felt a bit whipsawed by smoking policy. The legislature greatly limited indoor smoking at workplaces in 2005. Then there have been subsequent attempts to extend that to bars and all indoor workplaces. The legislature never did accept that. Then came an initiated measure last year which says no indoor smoking in indoor workplaces, no smoking motel rooms, no smoking in bars, no smoking in truck stops. That's it. And the voters overwhelmingly approved this. I mean, it was, I think, a 2/3 majority. It was not close. And the folks that are having to deal with this feel aggrieved because they've had to spend money on one set of regulations, then another, and then another. And some of this is brought about by local ordinances rather than the legislature. But they just feel aggrieved by this. And this brought about a bill which was introduced by one of our guests, Mr. Blair Thoreson, a representative from Fargo, a Republican. He said basically that the bill says that these businesses should be reimbursed for their expenses in complying with this law. That's basically it. Could you elaborate a bit, Mr. Thoreson?
Right, Dale. Well, as you said, over the last several years we've seen a lot of different levels of regulation amongst different cities in the state, different municipalities, and I was contacted by several business owners saying, now that we have this new policy in place that the voters put in, and we respect what they did, obviously, whether you agreed or not what happened, it's now the law of the state of North Dakota, and we'll go forward in enacting what they've done. There were still a lot of costs incurred up to this point because we weren't certain. We were following what we were told to do to that point, and now there is a whole new structure, and so we have a lot of costs. It's been a little bit onerous on us. Would you look at putting in a bill? I had a bit of experience with my own business in this, not as much as others probably, so it's not really about that, but it's about just the fact that we do have a lot of different costs out there, and it's maybe a way to recoup that. The tobacco funds do have a significant amount of money that they're holding on at this time. I understand they still have uses for them, but I think this may be one way that now that we've set this new regulatory climate, we can take care of those people that are affected by it and then move forward.
And could you tell us, please, Representative Thoreson, what business you're in?
I have part ownership in a business in West Fargo, North Dakota called Three Lions Pub. It's a restaurant and pub, obviously. But, we're one of several businesses in a kind of a complex, a strip mall per se. Talk to some of the other people around there. They're seeing the same things, whether it's a hair salon, a wireless device store, or an office place. We have all of those in there. And so it's something that's affecting all businesses of all ranges, not just the hospitality industry.
Our other two guests with us this evening are two members of the House Human Services Committee, which is looking at this bill that Representative Thoreson just described. They are Representative Gail Mooney of Cummings in District 20, God's country, of course, Trail County and some of the surrounding area. And we have Representative Kylie Oversen from District 42 in Grand Forks, which includes the University of North Dakota. both Representative Mooney and Representative Oversen are new Democratic members of the House. And could you please, I'll start with you, Representative Mooney, who, by the way, is one of the more inquiring members of the committee, and I say that in a very good way. Representative Mooney, what was your reaction to this proposal?
Well, I guess I was surprised at the actual proposal itself for reimbursement, and I hadn't thought of that actually. So it was a new concept for me and something that I had to kind of think about a little bit. But I can understand where it comes from. In our area, after the law was passed, and I freely admit I'm one of them that voted for this law because I have firmly believed all along that this is a great deterrent to the reduction in smoking overall. But then when you look at the back end of that legislation or the initiated bill and what it meant to our local people, our local businesses, and then even our local entities themselves, you know, the enforcement of something like this. There's a lot of burden that's put on the local people in either a business concept or other to ensure that we keep people honest. And I think that people by and large are good, they're smart. And so I was quite surprised to see that this length of information or I should say mandate had gone along with the language itself. So I think that it would have been great if we could have expected our local people in North Dakota to follow the law, as I think that they would. I mean, we can give people the respect due that they are deserved. So this idea that do we own a part of what we have created here, yeah, I think it's a valid question, and I think it needs to be asked and answered.
Representative Oversen, what was your impression of this idea?
Definitely a new idea. So as well as Gail was, I was surprised to see it come to the committee. Not in a bad way, though. I think it was an interesting proposal, and definitely if the law is going to create a burden, especially for smaller businesses, that's not the intention. And I think the testimonies that we heard today, both with this bill and then the next bill that came after, dealing with defining what an entrance is in a building, helped us to realize that there's a lot in this initiated measure that we would have had no way to foresee how far-reaching it's going to be for businesses across the state. So I can't say one way or the other how I feel about how we're going to vote on it yet, but...
Right, and I can respect that. The committee obviously just heard testimony today. You have to gather all the information, and that's kind of what I was putting forward. You know, the voters did make an informed choice, I believe, but I think there were some parts that were left out. And so that's why this bill came forward, and I think it's just one of those other pieces. In the committee testimony, there was a lot of discussion about costs incurred to businesses, some questions about signage and other issues, and so hopefully that will foster some debate here. I'd obviously like to see the bill go forward, but if not, at least so we know what all the pieces are, because I feel this is kind of the final piece in the smoking debate in the state of North Dakota. Now we have a broad law that affects everybody, so if we can use this to help cover some of the business's costs and then move forward from there, that's what I would like to see.
Representative Oversen and Representative Mooney, when you decided how you were going to vote for this measure, was this an issue that you took into account, what the effect would be on business compliance and the cost thereof? Yes,
I hadn't considered the cost, though. And that was a big part of the discussion today, was how well they advertised this signage requirements, including vehicles. That's a big part of this, is that now every vehicle that is considered employment or related to employment, such as the state fleet, has to have a sticker on it. So this is literally thousands of vehicles among the thousands and thousands of buildings that are affected. So I didn't consider it nearly enough when voting on it.
Would it have changed your mind?
Possibly. I'm in favor of the smoking ban as it is, but knowing the posting requirements, I don't know that component was necessary as it sits right now.
How about yourself, Representative Mooney?
And for me, the measure itself was something I was in favor of from the very beginning. But I think that I was probably as guilty as most people were, which was I read the part of the measure that related to the smoking. I did not sit down and read all 5 measures, all 5 pages of the measure, and I freely admit that I did not do that.
And you had a lot of company on the Human Services Committee from the
Yes.
poll that was, pardon me for interrupting, but the chairman of the committee, Mr. Robin Weisz, asked after the hearing of the committee members, how many of you read this measure before you voted on it? And 3 of them did, and the rest did not.
Exactly. So. And I have a business myself, and also I act as commissioner for Trail County, and having read that all the way through, would it have changed my mind? I mean, it very well may have, because the effects are very profound in some instances, and of course there's always the unintended consequences of anything. Now, do I think that the intent is true, and do I think that the intent of the measure is as it should be? Yes, I do. I just don't think we have to penalize people, and I don't think we have to beat up either smokers who continue to smoke or the businesses who are trying to conform to a new world in North Dakota, a new and better world in North Dakota. So I think everybody has the best interest at heart. It's how do you get there?
Yeah. One thing that probably should be interjected is that the folks that brought forward this initiated measure, they tried the legislative route to do the same thing.
Right.
And they were rebuffed more than once. And there was repeated attempts to extend the smoking ban to bars. This was not welcomed in the legislature. These ideas were defeated.
That's right.
And so, frankly, that is what the initiative process is for, is to essentially force onto the ballot something that the legislature isn't willing to deal with. And so that was the context in which this measure came forward. Mm-hmm. And maybe it isn't possible, even if the legislature had dealt with this bill, maybe these questions would still be coming up. I think that it'd be less likely that they would.
I kind of think so, too, just because of the flushing out process with committee hearings on both chambers and the public input. And obviously, we have the initiated process to go around, so to speak, the legislature. Obviously, I was here for some of those debates over the past several sessions, but we do have that piece of the puzzle where the people can go forward and put it on there. And sometimes maybe some of all the issues that are out there don't get looked at like we do in this process. But then again, we have this vehicle to come back afterwards and say, okay, maybe there needs to be a tweak here or a tweak there.
Exactly. And if we can tweak through it instead of just saying it's no good, because that is not the case.
Right.
The intent is good.
It's there. Let's make it work the best way possible for all of our citizens.
One of the things that should be discussed, I think, that is part of the bill is, and this concern was raised by the director of the agency that would be paying for the expenses. Mm-hmm. She said, you know, there's essentially no review process of expenses that are submitted to us.
Right.
We have to pay them. And, you know, what if I'm not saying that this would happen, but what if a proprietor of a business who's frankly annoyed that the initiated measure was successful in the first place said, okay, I'll have no smoking signs and they'll be in, 14 karat gold, and I'll just throw the bill to this agency and they have to pay it because the law says so.
And I thought about that too when putting this forward. They do have also the administrative rulemaking process where the agency could come forward and promulgate rules. The legislature obviously has a review of that later on. But I think, if there was some common sense rules put in place saying that you can't charge, I went out and bought a new vehicle because I wanted to put signs on it saying no smoking in front of my business, that type of thing.
On the hearing today, what were the things that came out that all of you, I guess I'll address this to Representative Oversen and Representative Mooney. What is it that surprised you about it in terms of the information that came forward and maybe made you think of things you hadn't thought of?
Go ahead.
Well, I think some of the first things were reinforced, maybe more than anything else for me, is the enforceability. How do you begin the process of enforceability? Is it up to the district health units in each county? Is it going to then fall to our state's attorneys to have to work through? So enforceability issues for me was really a big thing. And even one thing I had not considered was the federal part of it. So we have federal buildings, we have federal vehicles, federal people here in North Dakota. And another thing I hadn't thought of is our transient mobile population. So you have truck drivers, you have all kinds of people coming and going through North Dakota, and we want that. Now, how do we enforce that, and is that enforceable? So it raises all those questions. To what point did we maybe go beyond some common sense to the point where we've passed a law, we all accept that we did pass that law, now how do we just move forward and make it effective?
Okay. What surprised, what information came about, Representative Oversen, that you thought was particularly interesting or notable?
Yep, I would agree with a lot of what Representative Mooney said, and a lot of it's just, again, how far-reaching it is. Especially, to me, the most surprising was the vehicle component of this legislation or this measure, that it includes planes and trains and things like that
and
that you wouldn't consider things that are transient.
Yes.
So Delta Airlines, by this law, now has to have a sticker on their airplane when they land in North Dakota saying that you can't smoke within 20 feet of that. So there's a lot of things like that wouldn't have been considered. The definition of what an entrance is, which you would think is common sense, but the second bill brought forward to define that. So again, it's just really looking at the fact that a lot of people didn't realize what the impact is, and there's a lot of ambiguity in this bill right now that does need to be cleared up.
And one of the things, too, that this is, I don't believe that this is true for your bill, Representative Thoreson, but to change the initiated measure, you need a two-thirds vote.
Well, I've actually spoken with the Legislative Council there, and there is a question about that. It may require a two-thirds vote because depending on how it's interpreted, this may be seen as changing the voter's intent since it was not language in that initial process. So still waiting to get an answer on that. I would hope it takes just a simple majority, but if not, that's okay.
Do you think you can get a two-thirds vote?
I don't know. That's awfully tough. I mean, it depends. I'm not sure I can get a simple majority some days, but you have a lot of friends until the board starts turning green or red, and then you see what happens. So we'll see what occurs after this.
What Representative Thoreson is referring to is that at the front of the chamber there are large voting boards that have everyone's name on it, and when people vote on bills, the person's name turns green if they are voting yes, and it turns red if they are voting no. And there's been a lot of green so far in the legislature because there haven't been that many controversial bills, but we're going to see some red.
It becomes a very lonely place up
yes,
there on that board.
We're broadcasting live from Peacock Alley, where it's Wine Down Wednesday, half-price bottles of wine. Come on down and join us. We've been talking about smoking bans and what that all means in North Dakota for businesses and all the supporters and small business owners and actually consumers from that level. So we come back from the break. We'll look forward to having a new set of guests and continuing this dialogue after the break. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back to Peacock Alley, where we're broadcasting live, and you're listening live on KFYR 550 AM radio. This is Legislature Today with your host Dale Wetzel. I'm Gary Emmett filling in to help keep the dials turning here and keeping Dale supplied with water, and if he needs any errands run, that's what my job is in between this. So
yeah, I just enjoy watching you sit there and drink wine.
Well, see, you're doing all the work.
You're taking full advantage of half-price wine bottles.
This is Wine Down Wednesday. Last night was 2-for-1 teeny Tuesdays martinis.
Yes,
I didn't have any of those. That's a little bit over my.
No, I thought you had at least 4.
No, I don't.
Shaken instead
do
of
not
stirred.
touch that stuff. That's
okay.
bad business. So we've been the last half hour, Dale. We were talking about smoking and what it means in close to establishments. So this next half hour, you got a couple set of new guests, and I'll turn it over to you to introduce our guests and talk about.
It's kind of this. It's the same subject, but what we're going to be talking about, and this sounds very arcane, but you'll realize the importance of it in a moment, is what is an entrance and what is a sticker, because the law that we're going to be talking about, and first of all, let's introduce our guests. We have Representative Robin Weisz. He's a Republican from Hurdsfield. He represents an extremely large district in central North Dakota, which was recently drawn only last year by the legislature. And he is the chairman of the House Human Services Committee, which has jurisdiction over the bill that we're going to be talking about this evening. We have Naomi Muscha. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes.
Thank you. She is a Democrat from D-Enderlin. She is a new member of the legislature, one of the group of new Democratic legislators in the legislature this year. And we have Representative Dick Anderson of R-Willow City.
That's correct.
He is a Republican. And Representative Muscha and Representative Anderson are both members of the Human Services Committee, and they are familiar with this bill that we're going to be discussing because they had a hearing on it today. And what the bill does, there's two elements to it. One of them, it changes the definition, or it inserts a definition of entrance into the law that North Dakota voters approved last November to ban smoking in indoor workplaces. And the reason that the question of what is an entrance is important is because the law is being interpreted by some folks who are trying to figure out how to comply with it as applying to things like garage doors and I guess I'd call them loading dock bay doors, places where people can use to get in and out of a building, but you wouldn't normally think of a garage door, for example, as a way to, the best way or even the primary way to get into a business. You think of a door that pulls out or that opens inward, and the definition that's part of this bill that is being proposed essentially says if the door opens from the right or the left and it's a way into the building, it's an entrance. And this is meant to get rid of the idea that a garage door is an entrance and therefore needs to have a posted warning saying no smoking in this building and you can't smoke 20 feet from this entrance, which is part of what the initiated measure says. The other element of the bill is the labeling of vehicles that can be considered places of employment. Now, that sounds a bit bureaucratic, and frankly, I didn't put it very well. But we're talking about things like a plumber's truck or the truck of a business or a state fleet vehicle that state employees use to drive around. These are all considered extensions of the workplace. And as a result, you cannot smoke in your workplace because of the law. And so there needs to be, according to the law itself, some sort of indication that you can't smoke there. And so how do you satisfy that requirement? Well, the law says that you have to have some kind of notice that you can't smoke in this vehicle. And the law that the proposal or the bill that is before Representative Weisz's committee would get rid of that requirement because it's regarded by some as being a bit too cumbersome. For example, every state fleet vehicle has to have a sticker now that says you can't smoke in this vehicle, even though there has not been smoking allowed in state-owned vehicles for a number of years. You have to have a sticker in an ambulance, and who sees anyone smoking in an ambulance unless you've got a really serious addiction problem? And the representative of the Fuel Dealers Association said, why would we put up no smoking on our places of business because we got all this gasoline and flammable stuff around. I mean, we already have placards everywhere that say no smoking, we don't need another one. Representative Weisz, when you saw this bill, what was your impression of it?
Well, Dale, I think the reason for the bill is exactly how you spelled it out, and I think it was an attempt to try to put some reason into some of the legislation because, frankly, it goes even beyond just the normal thinking of a state fleet vehicle or that plumber's truck, as you pointed out, because based on the language in what was passed in Measure 4, Amtrak is going to need to placard their vehicles if they run through the state of North Dakota. Delta Airlines will be forced to placard every airplane. Even though there's no smoking inside, the law clearly says it has to be clearly visible from the exterior of the vehicle. So that Delta plane is now going to need a sticker in that doorway when you walk in. Now, obviously, I guess we could choose to ignore that, but, that is the law. I mean, that's what was passed by the voters back in November. So I think this is an attempt maybe to put some reason into what was passed, because I would argue I don't think anybody was aware of what those provisions were that were in Measure 4.
Representative Muscha, what was your impression of this bill and the arguments for and against it during the hearing this morning, or this afternoon, I should say?
Well, basically, I would probably second what Chairman Weisz said. I have a son-in-law that's a farmer rancher, and he has 2 employees. So technically then, to follow this law to the T, he needs to have a sticker in every vehicle on his farm, from the little, I shouldn't say little old tractor, but I mean everything from every little truck to the semis.
And does your son smoke?
No.
Well, that's
no.
Part of the interestingness of it, isn't it?
No, neither does my daughter. And to my knowledge, neither of these men do either that work for it. But to follow the letter of the law,
you have to make sure that in case some smoker jumps into one of the trucks, that they have a little sticker that says you can't smoke in here.
Right.
Representative Anderson, what was your impression of this?
I just thought the bill was a little bit overreaching in some of the wording. And that's how come it's important to pay attention to legislation. Sometimes you vote for something and you hopefully can see what the result's going to be by you supporting something or not supporting something. Common sense tells you not to smoke, like you said, around fuel trucks, and it's just a little bit too overreaching. I don't think people voted for that, and it's probably our fault because we don't read the complete measure, but sometimes I wish the measures were only 1 page long so people would read the whole thing.
Okay, it's confession time. How many folks who are at this table read the measure before they voted on it? Robin says he did. How about Representative Muscha? What did you read it all?
In its entirety, no.
Okay, how about you, Representative Anderson?
I didn't read it. I voted no because I didn't think you should be dictating what to do on someone else's property.
Yeah, one of the joys of voting no is you don't have to read it, huh?
I suppose I should fess up. One of the reasons I'd read the whole bill because it was in front of the Legislative Management Committee. I may not have read it all either. Prior
if you
to
weren't
that.
Like sitting there getting paid to read it?
Right. That was part of my duties was to read it and see if it was going to have effect on any of the state operations.
You mentioned some of the things that folks may not have thought of, like, Delta Airlines having a sticker, and I imagine it would have to be a fairly large sticker for it to be seen, and trains and that sort of thing. You earlier today you were mentioning the idea of a farm as a place of employment from the point of this law, and whether you could smoke on a farm if you had hired people on it. Could you just elaborate on that a bit?
Well, Dale, I kind of did the math a little bit on my own farm, and I'm guessing I would need at least 60 placards between my vehicles and the buildings, because it makes it clear that a grain bin, for example, because my employee might go in there to shovel grain or whatever, so every shed, every bin, but also the law is clear, place of employment doesn't have to be inside. It's wherever you're working. So if we're doing maintenance work or anything obviously out in the farmyard, that's a place of employment, so that would be disallowed. I suppose you could argue when you're out there in the field, but if that employee is going back and forth in my field, that is his place of employment. I would argue he can't smoke there. Even if he goes out to the road, if it's a township or county, we still own that even though we don't get to use it. We're taxed for it, so I would assume he has to go out to the highway, in my case, to smoke, if indeed I had an employee that smoked.
Do you have a lot of traffic on the highway by your place?
It's picking up, so I would assume there might be a little issue if they...
Be more after tonight.
Yeah, it might be. And maybe some think that's stretching it, but I think there's no question that within my farmstead, for example, I don't believe they could smoke anywhere within that farmstead, because if you're unloading grain into a grain bin, of course that's where they're working. So if they're filling fuel at your fuel tanks, if they're doing anything, so the whole farmstead becomes the place of employment. And and again, every tractor, combine, truck would have to be placarded, and I would argue every one of my personal vehicles would have to be placarded, because I may send that employee to town to get something. And the law is clear. A vehicle is considered a place of employment even if he isn't directly compensated. I mean, the law seems clear that I don't even have to be paying them at that time. But if they're doing it for me, either paid or unpaid, it's considered a place of employment.
And let's talk about this a little bit more. If you are being paid to drive your vehicle, being paid mileage to drive your vehicle on behalf of your employer, can you smoke in your vehicle? And do you have to have a sticker in it?
Well, Dale, I would argue you would have to have a sticker. At the time that you're being paid or compensated, I would say yes, you would not be able to smoke. Now, once that you punch the clock, so to speak, I would argue then fine, you can smoke again, even though your vehicle is placarded, differently. But then you're off the employer's clock, and it is your personal vehicle. So then I would assume you'd be fine to smoke, and then you could take that sticker off, I suppose, off your vehicle.
There are a couple of bills about this issue in your committee today. One of them was the bill we've been discussing about whether vehicles should be stickered, and also whether there should be a more precise definition of what an entrance is to a building. And there was another bill as well that dealt with whether businesses should be compensated for their expenses for compliance. And what my question is for you, Representative Muscha, and you, Representative Anderson, is what came out of these hearings that you thought was particularly striking in terms of information that stuck with you, that you thought was particularly interesting in terms of things about the measure you hadn't thought of before or didn't consider before?
The signs, and like Robin was talking about, Amtrak going through the state and Delta Airlines. I mean, how would you enforce something like that? It's almost like we're passing a bill or have a bill that you can't enforce. So you have a lot of questions concerning that, or at least I do anyway. And then as far as the entrance goes, I always thought an entrance was the main point where your customer base went in and out of a building. If you're receiving goods through an overhead door or even a walk-in door in the back, I didn't consider that a main entrance. And but there again, it's a definition of what entrance is.
What about you, Representative Muscha?
Well, the bill about reimbursing businesses just made me think, oh my goodness. There are businesses, well, I'm obviously more familiar with some near Fargo, but that built, so we say the smoke huts or whatever they exactly wanted to call them. Other businesses had installed tremendously high-powered fans, etc., for their exhaust system. They've invested thousands of dollars. So on one hand, I can see where they're feeling, shall we say, a little frustrated, as the term was used today, with the ever-changing laws after they've invested all this. And then again, should they be reimbursed for all of that? I don't know. I'm not so sure on that either, because that's a tremendous amount of money to add up for the entire state.
One of the questions I had when I was listening to this was, okay, and this goes to the point you were making. Let's just say I'm a business owner and I'm frustrated by the various changes in policy, and I have this bill here that says I can submit my expenses for obeying this initiated measure. I can submit them to the Tobacco Control Agency, and they have to pay me. So I'm thinking, well, what I should do is maybe get myself some 14-karat gold signs that say no smoking 20 feet away, and just plaster them on next to my doors, and then give this tobacco agency the bill. I mean, there's nothing in the legislation that you all considered today, at least nothing that I could see, that would prevent that, because it says reimburse me my actual costs.
Right.
And these are my actual costs. Even they might be completely outlandish, but they're my costs.
That is correct, Dale. You're absolutely right. They do have to submit receipts, but
that shouldn't be a problem.
Right. I mean, obviously they could do something relatively extravagant and potentially ask that group to pay, and that might be some of the problems with that particular piece of legislation. But I think it does point out, and as Naomi said, the frustration. Some of them have spent up to $200,000 complying with the law to have a separate place where they can smoke, separate the bar from the restaurant or whatever, do the ventilation, do all the other things, and then we turn around and say, okay, now you can't do that at all. You have many facilities that build smoking huts. Again, to make sure the state, we built a smoking hut out there. You can't smoke in the smoking hut anymore because by the definition it is too enclosed to allow that. So I sure can't argue with the frustration that any business owner has in trying to comply with all these changes. And I think part of the frustration may be with the process if Dick Anderson here decides to put a bill and say that would have banned smoking, we would have had hearings. Every Chamber of Commerce or every business group, the motor carriers, whatever, could have came in and testified for or against it, whatever issues there were. We would have discussed it in committee. The House would have voted on it. Then it would have been in the Senate. And I think part of it is they felt there's no process to have input. So now arbitrarily this is handed down to them, and they have to comply, and they really didn't have the ability to come in and tell us where there was issues or problems. And I think that's the difference between, some of the testimony that, well, you have to comply with other regulations, and you do. I mean, businesses comply with a lot of regulations. But they've always had the ability to come to the legislature whenever those were proposed and make their case. And we would look at it and weigh, say, public safety against, the business's increased costs and regulation and have that balance. And I think they feel that didn't happen in this case.
It'd be interesting to see if people heard what we heard today, how they would support Measure 4 if it was coming up. I think the results would be different.
Do you think it would lose? I mean, it passed by 2/3 vote.
Well, 2/3 is only 17%. I think you'd influence 17% of the people to go the other way. I think it'd have been close.
In defense of the folks who offered the measure, I mean, there were attempts to do what the measure ended up doing in the legislature itself, and
they failed,
and they were not successful. And that is why they took the initiated measure route, is because they figured, well, we can't get these folks to go along with us, and so therefore we'll just take it directly to the people and see how it rolls. And in fact, it rolled quite well.
Yeah. But I would agree with Dick. I think the whole measure was, and the advertising and everything else was precipitated on the idea of we're going to ban smoking in bars and the workplace. And the majority of the people said, yeah, I don't have a problem with not smoking in the bars. I would doubt that 2% of the people read all 5 pages of that measure and understood the implications that were there. And so I would agree that if that had been explained individually to every person, I'm not sure the measure would have passed. Now, they would again support banning smoking in bars. I'm sure that would pass tomorrow again by a large measure.
And just so that we're clear, I don't think anyone in the legislature is saying that they're not questioning the goal of the initiated measure.
Right.
Because they accept the fact that the people of North Dakota have said, we don't want smoking in an indoor workplace. We don't care if it's a bar and you're used to smoking there, or you think that, if there's one indoor place in America where you should smoke, it should be a bar. It's just like, okay, the decision was made.
Correct.
There's no smoking in bars, no smoking in indoor workplaces, and that is that's the policy of the state of North Dakota now. What's being argued about here are really kind of tangential things. Where should you put a placard that says no smoking, and should you have to put it in all these vehicles and in places where there wasn't any smoking before? It doesn't have really anything it has very little to do with the goal of banning smoking in an indoor workplace.
The law
Right.
basically put a burden on people in business, and I don't think that was the intent of the measure.
No.
And I would agree. Whether I agreed with the measure or not, the people were clear that they didn't want smoking in the workplace or in the bars. And yeah, nobody's disputing that or not accepting that. And I'm sure it would pass tomorrow if we voted on it again. But I would still maintain that people were not aware of what this would require. You know, every farm, every business, every trucker. It was pointed out in committee, if the feds don't allow you to put stickers on the windows on your truck, so of course now they have to put it on that $150,000 truck. They got to add an extra sticker on the paint of that, and it would include the trailer and etc. So
what about an aircraft?
Yeah,
Right.
The idea of a sticker on a Delta Airlines jetliner is really intriguing to me. I want to see what that one looks like.
I would like to see how you can argue that if I have to have a sticker on my tractor, why wouldn't Delta have to have a sticker when they land in Bismarck?
Yeah, one of the interesting anecdotes that was told at the hearing today was if a person has a hired man on a farm, he's an employer, he has to put a sticker on his tractor saying no smoking in the tractor. And I just thought that was just very interesting. We've been speaking this evening with Representative Dick Anderson of Willow City, a Republican. We've been speaking with Naomi Muscha, a Democrat from Enderlin, a new member of the legislature, and Robin Weisz of Hurdsfield, a Republican and the chairman of the House Human Services Committee. Thank you very much for your time, everyone, and thanks for discussing this issue with us.
Broadcasting live from Peacock Alley. When we come back from the break, we'll have our sponsors, U of Mary.